to talk to you today about ethics, but I want to make one thing really clear. I'm not here to tell you what's right and what's wrong. I'm about practical ethics, which means that context is really important. It means what's happening right here, right now, in Panama City Beach, in our waters, and how can we best deal with the situation that's happening now. So when it comes to conflict over what's right, or even what's true, to my mind, or from this perspective, there are no absolutes. However, there are better and worse ways of living in the world, and better and worse ways of handling this whole situation that we've got going now. So, how do we do that? First, I want to sort of zoom out a few clicks, okay, and start with a really broad perspective to understand this issue. And I want to think about how we think about things. Some say there are two ways to get at the truth: the way of the scientist and the way of the lawyer. So the scientist gathers facts, gathers evidence, looks for regularities, forms theories about that evidence, and then tests those theories. The lawyer, on the other hand, begins with the conclusion that they want to convince others of, right? And then seeks evidence to support that, while at the same time trying to discredit any evidence that doesn't support. I should tell you, full disclosure, I happen to be both a lawyer and a social scientist. So, I'm also a student of a pretty new field called social neuroscience. And it turns out that all of us, all of our minds, that is, are designed to be both a scientist and a lawyer, both a conscious seeker of objective truth and this unconscious kind of really advocate for what it is that we already believe. So what's wild about this new science is that we can literally see into the brain, and with the use of fMRI machines, and see how it is we think about things and how we explain things in our lives and what we value and how we see it all. And all of it happens largely within parts of our brains that are completely out of view of the conscious part of our mind. It's all unconscious stuff that's processing underneath. Now, I'm going to be talking about various perspectives and positions and values that I found over a couple of years in doing my dissertation work a few years ago that are held by the different stakeholders involved in this situation. And it's helpful to remember, I think, the reason I'm bringing this up, when considering others' perspectives and when considering our own perspectives, that we're all hardwired to think like both the scientist and the lawyer. And it turns out that with the new brain imaging technology, that our brains are like decent scientists, but all of us are outstanding lawyers. Does that make sense? You understand what I'm saying? So I offer that up because, well, first of all, it's cool, right? I mean, it's astounding. But really, to help us make room to see and hear more in the conversation when we remember that each of us comes to this from a particular perspective. And that perspective is without question tied up with our deeper values and our belief systems. And a lot of that we're not even consciously aware of. So, like I said, I worked for a couple of years in untangling the various perspectives of the stakeholders involved in the Wild Swim With activities here in Panama City Beach. And these data probably, they won't be a huge shock to anybody anyway, but it's worthwhile to take a look at it all together, and I'm happy to make this available to anybody who'd like to see it, because it's sort of kind of delineates who's in favor and who's opposed to swimming with wild dolphins, right? And what the justifications are and why they feel the way they feel about it. So whether the wild swim with tour folks or the marine park industry or the animal advocates or the local commerce representatives support or oppose the dolphin swim with tours or the encounters that take place in captivity, it really kind of makes sense intuitively. From these positions and these justifications, we can then get an idea, and the reason I put them up here is to get an idea of what kind of values are sort of beneath these positions and these perspectives, what they believe is right and good and just and fair. So the tourism board or the Chamber of Commerce, they're here to maximize profits, right? And when I talked with them, you know, the Dolphins, whether at Gulf World or in the Gulf, they are a profitable tourist draw. They had never at that point, and this was a few years ago, had any reports of injuries or problems, and so they had no problem with it at all. They thought it was a good thing. Tour operators, you guys rely on the Dolphins as a means for making your business work. So there's certainly a sense of Dolphins as these valuable resources, yeah? Many captains also seem to value Dolphins, though, as more than that. They're seen as clever, intelligent, social, curious, independent. They may be seen as playmates or offered up as even healers. Mostly, though, the thing that distinguishes that viewpoint, that value, is the value of the Dolphin's autonomy. Marine Park, of course, commodifies Dolphins as the primary customer draw. They also characterize Dolphins as educational tools or ambassadors. The primary difference, of course, is that the Marine Park is typically talked about Dolphins as being under control and therefore safer for the interactions that take place. Animal advocates, on the other hand, are careful to make very, very clear that all dolphins are wild animals, yeah? And that any activity could cause harm to both them and to people that are swimming with them. Animal rights advocates value dolphins as having this intrinsic moral value, and for them that value comes above and to the exclusion of any other value that might also exist, like an economic value or even an entertainment value. Now, when it comes to NIMFs or NOAA, it's not quite as straightforward. On the one hand, NIMFs opposes in-water interaction in the Gulf, generally speaking, and there is a gray area here, and I'm not giving legal advice, but I'd be happy to tell you about my opinions on that, aside from right now. But they do seem to indicate, especially with the Protect Dolphins campaign and the literature and the PSAs, that let the wild ones be wild, that they stand with at least that value of the animal advocates that says we value the dolphin's autonomy, the wild dolphin's autonomy. But NIFS condones dolphin interaction in captivity as well, which suggests they value treating at least some dolphins as commodities that are appropriately kept in human care for the purpose of entertainment or education. And that incongruity is complex, and we could have a whole nother conversation about that, but that's not what today is about. So we'll move on. The chart here, that I'm going back to the original chart and just highlighting those two sections, and it gives us an overview of where these voices in the conversation stand with regard to the issues. And it helps us see what all of us agree on and what we have agreed on for a long, long time. And that is, we're all opposed to feeding, given that also some of the tour leaders are actually feeding. But generally speaking, there is agreement across the board. Feeding's not a good idea. It's bad. We know it's illegal. It's very clearly illegal. This is not a gray area. And that enforcement is important. So we also seem to agree that the safety and well-being of both dolphins and people is important. But what exactly that means for each of the stakeholders, that can be different. And so when we get there, we've got these competing values. So that's the natural question comes, okay, well, who's right? Who's right? That, you know, we have competing values, so what do we do? Well, this is where the practical ethics work comes in. Which again is not to say who's right and who's wrong, but to talk about how we can best proceed given the current situation and within the context that we're looking at. Let's, we can just go with the basic information about the swim with situation here that's relevant and verifiable, that we can all agree on, yeah? Free-ranging dolphins, complex, intelligent, social creatures with their own agenda. Do we agree? Given our observation of their behavior over time, they can and they seemingly do choose to interact with people. Agree? People, many of them also, given the opportunity, will choose to interact with dolphins. In fact, we know that people love to interact with dolphins. The history of the human-dolphin relationship and our fascination with dolphin goes back eons, back to the early Minoans. Whether some people like it or not, there is a wild swim with tour operation industry here and now, and you guys rely on these activities to remain economically viable, to keep your business going. Yeah? We're still good? Everybody agree?
Yes.
The history of feeding in our area is what created the swim with opportunities. And whether feeding was illegal many years ago, there's a lot of young folks here today. How many people remember when the feeding issue wasn't as clear as it is today? There used to be a very gray area where a lot of the same questions you guys are asking today was being asked about feeding. What happened was it took years of litigation and rulemaking, and now it's no longer unclear. It's been made part of the regulation. If you get deep enough into the regulations, you will see it says feeding, essentially, feeding equals harassment. Currently, there's nothing that says if you're in the water and a dolphin's also in the water, that's harassment. So, probably no one wants to see this situation go the way that the feeding issue went for a number of reasons, but there is some ambiguity, and I want to acknowledge that it's uncomfortable to have that ambiguity. But what it gives us today that we have that we didn't take the opportunity before perhaps is this here and now, is having this conversation and taking a look at, okay, well, let's take a look at what's happening, let's take a look at the risk of harm and all of that stuff, and come to a place where we get some best practices on board. Police ourselves, police each other. And it's just a much, much better way to go. So, values in favor of swim with. It's fun. It's educational, maybe, some people would say. And I would be one of those people that would suggest that, yes, it's educational, and now maybe it'll be even more educational because you'll be able to take more information back to your customers. It's also otherwise maybe beneficial for the dolphins or the environment. As people experience being with free-ranging dolphins, they may be motivated to do things to conserve, to better protect their environment, to understand dolphins in their environment more. And there may also be other intangible benefits linking personal psyche to being in the natural world and having those experiences. Dolphins, too, seem to like it. We may not know the intangible benefits that dolphins get. We know the tangible ones with the fishing group. Go there right now, but they get something out of it because they keep doing it. And it's probably something more than just the dead fish. Yeah? How many people think it's just because of the fish? Nobody? I agree. Their agency and their intentionality, I think that's where we look, though, to see, okay, well, at least for here and now, this is something that they're choosing as well. So, swim with tour operators, obviously, you've got an economic stake in this thing, and the Chamber of Commerce and local businesses also have an economic stake in this thing. So, skipped one, but oppose. Main reason to oppose, why? Risk of harm, right? Risk of harm to people, risk of harm to dolphins. So we've got these competing values, so what do? So we take these factors in mind, and a practical ethics approach would have us balance and integrate those multiple values in ways that are good for both people and dolphins. And what works here, by the way, may not work in other places. And what works today may not work tomorrow. And in fact, I've learned a lot today myself. Things have changed over time. Things are getting really bad. A few years ago, from my research, we didn't have, not yet, it wasn't as bad as this. And I can see the writing on the wall. It looks like it's heading in the bad direction. So let's talk about the risk of harm. Risk of harm to people before now, if we were not talking specifically about Panama City Beach, but if we were talking about, say, like the Bahamas. Have you guys been out to the Bahamas? Anybody had any experience with the spotted dolphins in the Bahamas? Yeah. A few years ago, at least, and I can't speak to that right now, but a few years ago, to say, to have a real conversation about it. What's the likelihood of harm, that someone's going to be harmed by a dolphin out in the Bahamas? We're talking Bahamas now, we're not talking here. I asked that question and I would get this look like, what? What do you mean, harm? You mean like, what? It just was off the radar. Nobody thought about that. That just wasn't it wasn't a real risk of harm. Now, here, I had not been able to track down any incidences where a dolphin had caused harm to anyone who was involved in a tour a few years ago. Obviously, that's changing. And so I'm not comfortable with it. I might have said before, the risk of harm to people, for swimming with dolphins may be something that is no more risky than when people choose to go into the Gulf and risk having a shark attack them, or jellyfish sting, or lightning strike them, or any number of things that can happen when you choose to weigh your risks and say, okay, it's a hot summer day and the Gulf is beautiful, so I'm going in for a swim. But I'm not going to say that anymore. I will say, however, that I think one of the things that's important to think about when we think about the wild issue is, even though it's site and situation, that there is a connected thing, and that is there are these interactions in captivity. This is not to single out Gulf World, and this is not to make an us or them situation when I bring this up. But I do think it's something that we need to bring up, because what we do know for sure is that in the captive industry, with the swim with programs that are guaranteed, with the dolphins that are under control and therefore safer, it's not necessarily so. We do know that there are injuries there with those dolphins, and I'm glad to have Gulf World here today so they can talk about some of what aggression looks like and that kind of thing, because I know they can speak to that. Now, that said, again, I know I'm going all over the place here, but I really feel like, wow, okay, we've reached a tipping point here, because I learned today or yesterday about a girl, 12-year-old girl, who'd been somehow mouthed, either bitten or dragged under or something like that by one of the dolphins out here. Was it last year? I would have said, day before yesterday, we can't compare Beggar to the dolphins here. Beggar is a lone sociable dolphin. And just from a perspective of talking about what we ought to do right here, right now, look at it, understand it, but that dolphin is not our dolphins. These dolphins are individual, remember, intelligent, curious, and autonomous, making choices for themselves. However, I think I may be revising my stance on that. I don't know. Clearly, there are bites that are being reported now. Maybe it's the carrying capacity. Maybe there's just too many people out there. Maybe it's with the jet ski thing. I'm not sure. But The risk of harm to people, I notch it up as of today, and it bothers me. It bothers me a lot. So, okay, so risk of harm to people. There's also risk of harm to who? To the Dolphins, obviously. I didn't know half the stuff that we're finding with it. I mean, you guys, and I heard some folks talking, and we know they're running around with hooks. We know they're going fishing with the guys out on the fishing boats. But a screwdriver in the head? What? That's insane. Somebody told me once that the #1 cause of sea lion death on the West Coast, I don't remember who told me this, I don't know if it's true, but they told me that it was gunshots. So that's what I remember, that's what came up for me when I heard about the captain who was shooting at the Dolphin from the deck. Crazy. And then there's cigarette ashes down the blowhole, and there's, all number of things. The risk of harm to the Dolphins, it's high. It's super high. Here's where we are now. In terms of this, looking at this ethical perspective and what we ought to do from a real practical perspective, it really comes down to, let's take a look at the values, and when we take a look and then we integrate them and we balance them. So are the economic and intangible benefits of the Dolphin swim with activities, how do they balance against the risk of harm to people and dolphins? As a practical matter, given the current regulatory environment and the enforcement issues and the fact that there aren't more guys out on the water to enforce this thing, maybe it'll be better now with all of us in this thing together. But the demand for the Dolphin swim tours continues to rise, yeah? We know that, at least for now, the activity is going to continue. So to say, we should stop the activity is silly. That's silly. And in reality, we may never have perfect agreement on what is the right thing to do, yeah? That's okay. Because what's most important, at least from a perspective of practical ethics, is that we keep the conversation going. And I think to shut up our inner lawyer, who has already taken a position before we even come to the issue, yeah? To be open to considering the best evidence available here and now, in this place and time, in order to make not the end-all, be-all, best decision for all time, but, not the right decision, I should say. Not the right decision, but the best decision for here and now. So the better question, I think, is how do we lessen the risk of harm? At least enough that the benefits are, on balance, worth the risks. And this program that you're part of today is the best effort to date to making that happen. So on behalf of everyone, human and cetacean, thanks. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate it.